Welcome to the Sustainability Breakout theme of the Consumer Data Research Centre Conference. I'm Caitlin Robinson and I'm an academic fellow in quantitative human geography at the University of Liverpool. I'm also part of the Geographic Data Science Lab. And I'm really pleased to be able to chair this session today on sustainability. So within the broad theme of sustainability, an important angle that is quite often focused on is consumption, and in particular, ethical and sustainable forms of consumption. So when we talk about sustainable consumption, we mean the use of materials, different products, maybe energy or services in such a way that minimises our impact on the environment and also society more widely. And this is so that we can meet people's present day needs, but also to ensure that we can meet the needs of future generations as well. So the United Nations describes sustainable consumption as about doing more and better with less. So in the context of the climate emergency and issues of environmental degradation and growing levels of extreme wealth, an increasing number of people say that they care about sustainable and ethical issues. And what we've seen is that this is also translated into consumer spending habits. So in the last decade, there's been a rapid growth in spending on ethical products. For example, in 2019, we saw spending on ethical products, for example, different types of food or drink or clothing. And that spending rose to £41 billion in the UK. And that's according to the Co-op Ethical Consumerism Report. So this represents a fourfold increase in the past 20 years, whilst household expenditure during this time has remained broadly flat. So it's important then to evaluate and analyse this theme of sustainability if we are to understand consumption more broadly. In terms of some of the work that's going on at the CDRC in this area, it ranges from analysis of attitudes to ethical and sustainable consumption patterns, as well as thinking about future trends in consumption and also how these attitudes are likely to shape future markets. So today we're lucky to have three fantastic speakers to provide us with some detailed examples of this work that's ongoing in the CDRC in this area. First up, we're going to hear from William Young from the University of Leeds, who's a Professor of Sustainability and Business. And William will be giving a talk that's titled Eco-Labels, Conspicuous Conservation and Moral Licensing. And that talk will be exploring third-party assured products, eco-labelling, and how these labels can support a transition towards more sustainable consumption. We'll also hear from our second speaker, that's Konstantinos Leonidou, a Professor of Marketing at the University of Leeds, and they will be giving a talk titled A Cross-Cultural View of Values, Sustainability Attitudes and Activism. And this research explores how values shape attitudes towards sustainability and in turn shape people's attitudes towards things like activism and also their quality of life. And then our final speaker, last but not least, will be Alex Dalton, who's a data scientist also from the University of Leeds. And they'll be giving a talk about developing a carbon footprint calculator with Leeds City Council. And this talk will be discussing how environmental issues in the food system can be addressed by the City Council through the development of an interactive dashboard. So we're going to see lots of interesting and cross-cutting themes in these presentations that focus on that relationship between consumption and sustainability, but also some real-world applications of consumer data to understand some of these issues. So I'm really excited to hear from all three of our speakers today, and I'm sure you're going to have lots of questions for them. So as we're talking, if you'd like to add questions into the chat, and my co-presenter Pete Bourdain will be collecting these for a bit of a Q&A session later on. So brilliant. So I'm now going to hand over to our first speaker, that is William. And I'll leave it to you, William.
Thanks. I'll just share my screen. Okay, so good morning, everybody, and thank you for the introduction. So I'm at the University of Leeds, but the work we've been doing is a team effort with Fanny, Ralph and Anne, all from the University of Leeds and also Cambridge Business School in France. So what we're looking at are eco-labels. So these are the labels you get on products, like Forestry Stewardship Council, Marine Stewardship Council, energy labels from the European Commission, and so on. So I think it was really trying to look at a question is about we as consumers, mainstream consumers, and we're focusing on mainstream consumers rather than niche green, deep green consumers who are very active. Look at the majority, so it's about the 70-80% of people who see green, have high values on green issues, but it's a secondary issue when they go shopping below brands and price and quality and so on. So they use green issues as a secondary issue. And what we wanted to look at is, well, let's have for mainstream consumers, they are not really in the detail of each different type of eco label and what they do. It's more about I've got choice of different products, and this one may have a eco label and may choose that if it's got the same quality and price and brand as the other one. But for a lot of us, there's a pressure now to with climate change, plastics, and so on, to improve our sort of sustainable consumption, and we want to look at what do eco labels play a role in that, and majority of eco labels concentrate on the highest their highest environmental or social impacts on the supply chain, rather than in the consumption end where the consumer is. So the consumer really is trying to reduce this by buying those products with eco labels and reducing the impacts on this in the supply chain rather than in the house. But some of them, especially energy and water use labeling, is focused on the consumption end. And so we want to look at, is there any sort of spillover to and links to what we consume at home and our resource consumption as consumers, and our eco labeling sort of consumption of eco labeled products. And that's important because at the moment, and it is changing, eco labeling is the main way to indicate to consumers that a product is green and how to consume better. There are other ways coming, but that's the main sort of mechanism, governance mechanism. We want to see if that's really working or not. So we were looking basically willingness to pay, actual consumption, and also a resource consumption. So just a reminder, we're looking at mainstream consumers rather than niche dark green consumers, so the majority of consumers. And we had two studies. One was a European study looking at consumption of eco labeling and resource consumption across Europe. I'll come on to those in a moment. And a second one based on a more focus on the UK. So the data sets we used for the European study was there's a special Eurobarometer data set collected by the European Commission, and it's every 3 to 4 years where they go and interview people across Europe in each country about all sorts of things, but one part of it is attitudes to the environment, as they call it, and we picked out in that individual levels of consumption. Of course, this is self-reported, but it's interview data, so it's a bit closer to truth than just online questionnaires. Demographic data, and then we added to that GDP capita, trusted NGOs from the World Economic Forum, some resource indicators from the Environmental Performance Indicator, and then some governance indicators. And for the UK study, we wanted to get a bit closer to actual consumption of products and resources. So we used Office of Natural Statistics data, IMD data, a really great database developed at Leeds, which looks at resource consumption data for at the consumption or national level, including imports of products to the UK. So it's looking at carbon footprint, water footprint, material footprint, and that material footprint is biomass, ores, fossil materials, and construction materials. And also and that's combined with TransUnion data, which is willingness to pay for more eco-label products, average households expenditure patterns, and then we're looking really combine that at the lower layer super output areas. Anyway, so what we were trying to get out of this was to see how we, if there's any link between resource consumption and eco-label consumption. So results at a European level basically fit our assumptions that the more affluent markets, eco-labeling products thrived in those areas. So you can see in the dark green are the areas, countries where there's higher consumption of eco-labeled products, and those are generally are countries with higher GDP, and that's not surprising. Those countries that generally have high awareness, eco-label products tend to cost more because they're incorporating the environmental social costs that other products put out into society. And people more readily have more time. If you have richer nations, they have more time to find these greener products. And then you can see in our scatter plot, there's a nice line linking between GDP capital on the left and consumption of eco-labels percentage at the bottom. So also fitting the line, fitting also our assumptions that on the European level, country level, that those there's a higher consumption of products in richer countries. So in terms of trying to look at the UK level, it's pulled out one graph here. So we have here is a percentage of willingness to pay for eco-label products. So the bottom there got 10% wanting to pay for eco-label products, and at the top 100%. And then the colored lines are the amount of resource consumption in for those people. So we've got in the grey the water, the orange material, and the blue greenhouse gas emissions. So you've got people who say lower percentage of people willing to pay for green products have a much less resource consumption compared to, if you look at the top there, much higher consumption if they're more willing to pay. Now, one way to explain that is that people with more resource consumption, richer, also want to do something about their impact, so they're aware about it. And those at the bottom of those willing to pay tend to be lower income households who don't have the time to look at eco-label products, but to be honest, shouldn't be looking at eco-label products as their resource consumption overall is much less. So where does that leave us in our conclusions? I mean, we've got a larger study behind us, and this is obviously just a summary of it. So eco-labeling is, in its current form, is links to higher rather than lower levels of resource consumption. So for people who have higher levels of resource consumption, they are tending to go and buy eco-label products. Affluent consumers may use eco-label products, product purchasing as a moral licensing mechanism. So there's a lot of other work that's really looked at why do people with high resource consumption, they tend to look for ways to reduce their consumption, and buying eco-label products is one way, but while ignoring other areas such as household energy consumption or travel and holidays and food consumption and so on. And it's a way, buying eco-label products is a way of getting over that. Marketing of eco-label products often are marketed as luxury, which attracts conspicuous conservation as the cause. People tend to be attracted to buying eco-label products if they want to show themselves, that they want to show other people that they're green. So in terms of recommendations for policymakers, we need to shift. For consumers, they need to be indicated which areas of their lives are high cost and high impact behaviors, and those eco-labels need to reflect that rather than just supply chain. And that leads to the companies also need to change the emphasis from just focusing on supply chain impacts, which are often the highest life cycle assessment areas, but to help consumers focus on what the right areas of consumption are. And before I pass over to Costas, I want to be clear. I'm not saying do not buy eco-label products. Eco-label products are good in comparison to their conventional alternatives. And I think it's important that we continue to buy eco-label products. But what we're saying here is that there's lots of complex things going on. If we want to help consumers focus on the right areas, the eco-labeling needs to really, governance of that needs to be slightly altered to help them. So that's all I've got to say on this topic, and I want to pass on to Costas. So I can see Costas. So over to you.
Hi, Costas. I'm afraid you're on mute, so if you could just come back and turn yourself off mute, thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that. So thank you very much, William, about the very interesting presentation about the work that you have been doing. My name is Konstantinos Leonidou. You can call me Costas. I'm currently Professor of Marketing and Business Administration at the Open University of Cyprus, and also an adjunct Professor of Marketing at Leeds University Business School. And I'm here to discuss a project that I have been working with colleagues from Austria and Canada, namely Professor Bodo Schlegelmilch and Dr. Verena Gruber, about sustainability attitudes and activism, and the implications of those for quality of life. And what we're trying to do here is we're trying to establish an understanding about what is happening cross-culturally, about developing such attitudes and engaging in activistic behavior within sustainability. Now, how did we came across this kind of project that is taking place as part of the CDRC? all of us have been, working in sustainability, which I'm sure that you understand that is a mega trend in the 21st century. When it comes to sustainability, it can be broadly defined as, through the triple bottom line, looking at the importance of society, economics, and the environment. And sustainability is achieving a balance between all the three. Sustainability has been, hugely becoming important in politics, in regulatory reforms and changes. For instance, the European Union has recently passed a piece of regulation about reporting sustainability initiatives, and understanding and attention and interest in sustainability has been growing within the UK, Europe, and many other places across the world. So it's very important to start to understand where consumers are coming from in terms of their motives, their attitudes. How do they behave, like William's study found earlier, in terms of looking at eco labels. So we need to understand that in order for us to design more effective marketing programs and approaching these consumers in a more effective and efficient way. So when it comes to sustainability, it's very important to look at it from the Sustainable Development Goals, which is considered to be the blueprint today to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. So these Sustainable Development Goals are looking across a different line of criteria, which companies, governments, but also consumers are looking in order to contribute to a better world for the future. And from a market research perspective, it is very clear that environmental concerns influence spending decisions, as William found out as well. This is also something that corroborates William's findings in terms of what is happening across different countries in terms of willingness to spend, on products or services that include environmental concerns. And one of the interesting things that we managed to see from this piece of research was that in emerging economies like China, Brazil, Indonesia, there is, and India, particularly India, there is an increasing concern about sustainability and increasing willingness to engage in sustainable behaviors. And interestingly, the interest is consistent among older versus younger consumers, despite the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic. And this is a piece of research that was published in 2021 from the Credit Suisse Research Institute, and it can be made available. I think it's available online. So that gave us the idea of working more in greater depth about understanding values. So what is a value system? It is an enduring organization of beliefs concerning preferred modes of conduct or end states along an importance continuum. Basically, it is how our DNA works, in terms of having our own belief structure, in terms of what our views are, and these values determine attitudes and concerns and interest on particular topics and drive particular and specific behavior. So this is basically starting from a more macro focus, going to a more micro focus in terms of the influence of values on specific consumer behavior. So with this in mind, it's very important for us to understand the value orientations that are out there. And there are two different types of value orientations. You have general value orientations that you can find in the literature. One example is the Schwartz Value Inventory that identified a number of different value categories, or the Hofstad's Culture Dimensions that also define particular value and characteristics of consumers that we can use in our research and understand consumer behavior. But also, there are more specific value systems that are outlined in the literature. For example, as we found out from our own literature review, there are 4 very important values within the sustainability area, namely materialism, which is a degree of importance and centrality attached to material possessions, generativity, future orientation, and the belief about the future impact of actions, religiosity, the importance of religion in one's life, and of course, family values, which is the significance of family life for an individual. And all these are said to be influential in terms of, when looking at sustainable behavior. When it comes to this kind of study, I'm not going to focus on the gaps of the literature. What I'm going to say is that what we try to do is we try to move away from the typical behavioral kind of studies looking at willingness to purchase. And instead of looking at these kind of variables, we looked at activism. Basically, the purposeful and effortful engagement of behaviors aimed at improving the state of society and the environment. We're talking about participating in petitions, voting for political parties, and engaging in a way that contributes to better life, not an individual behavior, but a behavior that focuses on the common good. And also, we try to look at this from the quality of life perspective to see whether there is a link between activism and quality of life, because the literature has been saying that there is a link, but this link was not substantiated in one country, let alone to many different countries that we're trying to do here. So, we did some research in terms of understanding these value systems and their impact on attitudes, environmental and social attitudes, and also looked at the impact of attitudes on activism and perceptions of well-being, basically. Very quickly, so this is our model that we have conceptualized. As you see, the value systems start from the left-hand side, and then these lead to attitudes, and then activism, and then all these lead to quality of life. Now, in terms of the survey, what we did is we collected data from the US, from 541 consumers in the US, and then we replicated the study in China and India, based on existing scales in the literature, and also following all required processes to evaluate the results, but also run the analysis. So our findings came out to be very, very interesting. Why? Because there are some values that are uniformly visible as influential in and being linked in terms of giving rise to positive environmental and social attitudes. I'm talking about generativity as an example, which seems to be an important factor in all three countries. There are also other values that can be visible in the US, for instance, but not visible in other contexts, such as the Eastern cultures like China and India. A case in point is materialism. Materialism was important, was significant predictor of attitudes in the US sample, but it wasn't significant predictor of attitudes in Eastern cultures, namely China and India. The other very important thing is about religiosity, which was found to be significant predictor in the US context, but again, not important in non-US context. On the other hand, we have family values, which one will assume that will be significant in the US context. It seems that this is not the case. And it's significant in China and India, but not in the US. Importantly, we found out that attitudes are linked with activist behaviors and quality of life perceptions, but not surprisingly, environmental attitudes are unrelated to activist behavior in China. And this can be, of course, maybe justified because of the recent developments in terms of trying to, curb activist behavior within that particular context. So what we learned from this kind of study, we learned that understanding values is important. So practitioners might craft marketing campaigns with these values in mind. Traditional standardized segmentation approaches might not necessarily work. So we need to look at particular contexts in place and what are the links associated in this particular context. It's very important to emphasize the benefits of being active in environmental and social sustainability, because this contributes to positive and high perceptions of quality of life. And it's important to replicate these findings in other areas, looking at interdisciplinary research, but also with actual behavior of consumers. And with this, I'm going to leave you with a quote, which I always give to the audience that I'm talking. It's very important to understand that if you think you're too small to make a difference, try sleeping with a mosquito. Thank you for the attention. And here are my contact details in case you need to reach me with this. Thank you very much. Now I will pass you to Alex.
Thank you. That was so interesting, Costas. Here we are. Fantastic. Oh, yeah. So thank you very much, first of all, Costas, for introducing me. And it's really brilliant hearing about all your interesting research along with William's. And it's a pleasure to be here to talk to you all about the work that I'm doing at the moment with Leeds City Council to develop a carbon footprint calculator. So my name is Alexandra Dalton, and I'm a data scientist at the Consumer Data Research Centre, currently working on a project that's co-designed in partnership with Leeds City Council to develop a decision-making tool, specifically a carbon footprint calculator. A little bit about me. I come from a mathematics background, graduating from the University of Leeds in 2020, and I've developed my career at the university ever since. My work has particular interest in nutrition and sustainability, which are two fields that we're all realising are extremely interconnected, and perhaps food can be a tool to help us all achieve a more sustainable lifestyle. You may have heard the recent shocking statistic that our food system contributes over a third of the world's global greenhouse gas emissions. All the way from pasture and paddock through to our plate, our current food consumption in the UK accounts for a huge 35% of our greenhouse gas emissions too. So that's 1/3 globally and nationally just from our food choices. We are in a climate emergency, and although we've been aware of this for a while, the impact of our food system has come to our attention more recently. Organisations and local councils alike are looking at how we can mitigate climate change and are setting targets to lower their carbon footprints, including Leeds City Council's recent target to be net zero by 2030. So Leeds City Council's net zero journey so far has looked at transport, industry, domestic housing, and other areas that we've been aware of the climate impact of for years. And now, crucially, they are responding to these sobering statistics by also looking to reduce carbon emissions from the food sector as part of their net zero journey. And this is what my presentation to you is about today, to talk about our recent partnership with the Council on research that's looking at how we can raise awareness and lower the impact of the role our food choices have on climate change. Leeds City Council's school meal service, Catering Leeds, has already introduced a climate-friendly menu in primary schools across the city. Our project, developing a carbon footprint calculator, is the next step to investigate school menus' current carbon footprint and equip school children and canteen facilities with the knowledge to explore reducing it. By the end of this talk, you will have seen an example of a quick response collaboration to address one of the key areas contributing to climate change. My presentation will enable you to see an example of this. And so to structure the talk, I'll start by introducing the project's aims, how we plan to achieve them, what has made this collaboration so successful so far, and then finally, how we'll use our work within the community to generate real-world impact. Going back to that statistic from earlier of our food accounting for over a third of greenhouse gas emissions, although it is shocking, it also gives some hope for change. Our food system is a huge contributor to climate change, but it's also the aspect of our day that we probably have the most control over. So in short, what does this project aim to do? By developing the carbon footprint calculator, we look to quantify the carbon footprint of meals offered across council-run venues, focusing first in schools, to increase awareness of the role our food plays in climate change and explore how this knowledge can be used to promote lower carbon meals. So how do we plan to do this? Well, as I've mentioned, we are developing a carbon footprint calculator, but what you may be wondering, does this actually mean? So what we're doing is developing an interactive, easy-to-use tool, which is a dashboard that you can simply upload a recipe to. Then the carbon footprint is calculated and a summary output is given detailing the carbon footprint of the meal. As I've mentioned, the first application of the tool evaluates the carbon impact of school meals offered across Leeds to follow up on that climate-friendly menus that have been recently introduced across primary schools. The dashboard is developed using R's Shiny package, and the calculator will be available as a web page for members of the council and canteen staff to use. So on the screen now, you should be able to see the current beta version of the tool. This is a web page hosting our carbon footprint calculator, to which a recipe can simply be uploaded on the left-hand side. Then behind the scenes, the tool will look at the different ingredients in the recipe and calculate the carbon footprint of the recipe overall. So just to explain a little bit more about how it works and the data that we're using. The data is twofold. We're evaluating the recipe data from the council to build a brief for the tool of the ingredients and recipes to search for and work with. And then we're also using open source data to generate these estimates. One of the brilliant strengths of this project was that the data was provided really quickly for the school meals from anonymous schools across Leeds. A PDF of school recipes was provided, as you can see on the left-hand side. And then on receiving this data, I extracted the recipe for each meal and collated them in a table like on the right-hand side. The council also provided us with anonymised transaction data for 5 schools across a 7-week period in 2021, allowing us to investigate which meals were more or less popular and understand usual habits, which is really useful when considering any meals for reformulation. So a little bit more about the tool. If you upload the recipe, then the behind the scenes work essentially is using open data, which is mostly values from research by Poor and Nemeczek, which is a meta-analysis drawing on robust studies around the world of a high and comparable standard for the carbon footprint of different ingredients. I then adjust these to represent the UK ingredients consumption as reported by the Food and Agriculture Organisation. And as cooking emissions are already included within the council's reported emissions, this tool looks at the stages from farm, processing and transportation all the way up to the point that the meal is about to be cooked. The summary output will have 2 key aspects: the carbon footprint of a recipe along with the ingredients breakdown. As we want to aid decision making, it's really important to think about that potential reformulation of certain recipes and useful to explore the ingredients breakdown along with just the recipe output. So having the ability to highlight certain high carbon ingredients is quite useful there. And also we've built into the tool that you can then filter through by ingredient, searching for a specific range of emission values on the recipes or filter down the table to certain recipes or locations or recipe types as well, before exploiting it in an output of your choice. Now I've covered the carbon footprint calculator, I also just wanted to speak on how we've ensured a successful project so far. Working closely with the council has been really key to the rapid progress that we've made in the last 6 months. Regular meetings have allowed us to ask questions as they arise. For example, what is a fish goujon piece? Of course, data can be of varying quality. So working closely with the council meant that we had their insight along with being quickly connected with other researchers at the council that were also familiar with similar data. So we found, for example, that a fish goujon piece is an Alaskan pollock goujon weighing 140 to 170 grams. And although this might not sound too useful, that level of detail is actually really important for accurately calculating the carbon footprint. Not only does this close collaboration make it quick to resolve any issues, but it's also meant that we can refine the tool as it's being built to really capture the Leeds food footprints. As this is a local tool, we wanted it to reflect the council's sustainability choices too. For example, all fresh meat is UK sourced, which is an element in the calculation that we were able to build into the tool. This project will provide Leeds City Council with that decision-making tool to assist procurement choices and future policy in Leeds to achieve the net zero target. To extend the reach of the tool though, impact and engagement are a really important part of this as well, where we're looking at how we can explore using knowledge from the tool to achieve those aims and increase the awareness too of that role that our food is playing in the carbon emissions. So we're planning to also run as part of this, as a sort of a 2-pronged approach. We'll have the decision-making tool for the council, and then also we're going to run in-school workshops in primary schools across Leeds, demonstrating the tool but in the form of an interactive sort of fun game for them. So the interactive game essentially is a very separate entity, but it will take knowledge from the interactive dashboard that we've got that I've shown you, and it will sort of translate it as a more engaging way for them. And so then they can really see the impact of their food and make that connection too. So it will translate that knowledge there for them from a calculator into a classroom tool, which although this is a local initiative, is also something we can see replicated on a larger scale data later down the line. The National Food Strategy called for an Eat and Learn initiative, so our school workshops will help to bridge that gap between research and real world change. making any procurement choices or reformulation also something that the children are more receptive to from these workshops. And this will help in part to make space for further food education in schools as part of the In Learn initiative. While the tool is focused currently on carbon footprint, with further time and resource, it has huge potential for application throughout the food system, where you can imagine carbon footprint outputs being interchanged with further environmental or health metrics. Now, with sustainable choices being made all the time, on the other hand, we also want this tool to be future-proofed, thinking ahead to if it's applied beyond schools. Therefore, the options are not static, and alongside uploading the menu recipe, we plan to have an option to also upload your own carbon emissions for certain ingredients if so desired. Furthermore, the carbon emission data that we're working with is open source, and the methods are clearly documented, so the estimates we have could be improved and applied to further applications with local data reporting. Central reporting is another ask in the National Food Strategy, and in the aim of creating a national food system data programme. So this tool is again something that can be improved as higher quality data becomes more available for sustainability metrics. So where are we now? Our prototype is in the later stages of development, with the beta version currently being trialled and feedback being gathered for suggestions, and also looking at its usability. As for the next steps, the tools used in action will then be reviewed to produce a final prototype. Having this tool is useful in itself, but then how we use it is so crucial to increasing awareness and driving change, which when thinking about climate action, that second part is so important, and through close collaboration is how it's achieved. Together, CDRC and Leeds City Council, they've formed a really informed and proactive hub for inspiration and real-world change. And you've heard about how we're using the interactive calculator to calculate the carbon footprints of meals and use it to change decision-making within the city. This tool is also going to increase awareness and to that aim of lowering carbon emissions. You've heard the drivers behind this project of shared values for that repeatable research, having a really clear vision for the project and having it being really achievable within the timescale, along with those open lines of communication between our two organisations. Carbon footprint is only one aspect of the climate emergency, however, one that we have lots of data to deal with. There are many ways that this tool could again be used to look at other environmental impacts. However, paramount to this project success, we chose to really concentrate on one issue at a time, such that we could deliver a revised tool within the timescale. I hope you've enjoyed hearing about the tool that we're developing and you can see the potential benefits. I'd definitely like to welcome any further questions. And finally, many thanks and acknowledgements to the brilliant members of the council who've been instrumental to this project and the fantastic researchers that I'm also working with at the CDRC. Thank you very much, and I'd like to hand back over to Caitlin now for the question and answer section.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Alex. That was brilliant, and a brilliant set of presentations from everybody. I think the plan is for me to hand over to you, Peter, isn't it, for the Q&A?
Yes, please feel free, Caitlin. Yeah. Thank you all for three really interesting talks. So there were some good questions in the chat, so I think we'll start by relaying them. But if anyone has any additional questions, then please feel free to add them into the chat as well, and we'll pick those up. So to start then in the order in which we saw the talks, so to start with William. So there was a question around what do you think are the main factors in preventing consumers from making sustainable choices? Do you think that a lack of access to clear and simple information plays a larger part than perhaps price?
There's a lot of factors, but I think it's best to say which, focusing on eco-labels, which ones work best. And I think there's two types that work best in the past, and those, the first one category are European energy label, which you see in fridge, freezers and cars and so on, and those are on every product. It is on a simple scale A to G, and so for consumer, often they're eco-labels, that hundreds of different eco-labels, but when there's the same label on every product and on a scale, then you can say, okay, I want a red fridge. Go in the shop or shopping online, and you can see there are 3 different red fridges, and they are B's or A's, and then you can choose the A one. Normally, if there's just a best performance star eco label, that eco label will be on the white fridge, and so people would then not know which of those 3 red fridges would perform better if there wasn't that grey A to G list. So yeah, I think it's got for the first one, the eco labels need to be on the most biggest environmental impact of that product, but and a nice comparison A to G. And the other area where eco labels work is where there's choice editing by the retailer. So for easier products, so for coffee, tea, chocolate, you'll find that most supermarkets, they've already chosen the products with eco labels on it, because it's an easy way for them to manage the supply chain. So I think there are a lot trying to move over to that sort of those systems really helps get over the information overload of types of environmental impacts and eco labels.
Thank you. And then in terms of the data that you used within your study, is it possible to apply that same methods to any different sectors, such as energy or travel sectors?
I think the 2 data sets that can be aligned to that, certainly the Eurobarometer, we only took a couple of questions out of that, and those data sets are available through the European Commission. They've got data centres that provide all those answers there in this raw form, so you can request that data. So certainly there, and perhaps TransUnion data. I've seen studies certainly looking at energy and travel in from there, and again, but then you need to request information from them.
Thank you very much. And then the question from myself, if I may, which is whether you've got any reflections on the sorts of actions or policies that might be taken to extend eco-labelling to either less affluent consumers or either to cheaper products as well.
Yeah, that's a difficult one. I think compulsory labelling on certain product categories is the way to get over that. So for high impact products, having compulsory labelling that you can see which are the products higher or lower impact on a scale, rather than if you just at the moment we're just, as I mentioned, just leaving it to the retailer. They are tending, because these eco-label products tend to cost a little bit more, they then market them as luxury products and add more packaging, and they become more bought by a higher affluent consumers. So I think it's having that compulsory labelling, which is slowly coming through. I think it depends what happens now with the UK. Now we've left, but hopefully we'll follow other European Commission initiatives on this.
Brilliant, thank you. And moving on to Costas, then thank you for your talk on the value system. So there was a question which I think you've addressed in the chat, but I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about how you found evaluating the value systems via the survey that you used in your study.
Yeah, thank you very much, Peter. Yes, we use perceptual measures. There are different ways of measuring values and value systems. As I said, there are the generic value systems that can be measured through the Schwartz value inventory scale, which is a very long scale and not very reliable. So we focus on the specific value systems and perceptual measures with questions just as the one that I share in the chat. And that goes for the other variables in the survey, and it was a survey across these 3 countries. In terms of quality of life, we did measure it perceptually and individually, but for government, there are other more objective measures to evaluate quality of life, such as GDP per capita, education level, poverty levels, and many other kind of indicators that governments can use to evaluate quality of life, which are used in different surveys and different kind of reports. But for us, all of the measures were perceptual in nature. I'm happy to share the scales.
Thank you, Costas. And then I was wondering a little bit whether you could talk a little bit more about how the focus and values can be used to create effective policy. And I guess as a sub question to that is, to what extent does that need to be localized, either within kind of the country, understanding the values of the population, or even in kind of sub-national extent as well?
Yes, very good question. Thank you, Peter. So in terms of the country differences, which is very important to understand, each country has its different history. It's the different cultural traditions. And when we're talking about the US, for instance, it's very difficult to distinguish between what has been happening in the past. So if the economy has been materialistic in nature, then it's very difficult to take that away from the society and suddenly say that sustainability will be an overarching theory or factor influencing behavior. So depending on the country that we focus, you need to understand the background, the history, and then accordingly use arguments that might help these kind of consumers tick and get them concerned in terms of sustainability. For instance, we found out that in all different countries, you can use arguments about the generations, about what you're doing. You need to be concerned because it's important for your children and your children's children. So that kind of aspect works, relatively in a stable manner. While you see in cultures where family has a more cohesive kind of status, like India and China, where kids stay in the same house with the parents for many, many years, these kind of values tend to matter more in terms of being concerned about sustainability. While in the US, where more independent kind of adulthood, when you turn out to be 18, things become more independent and you're pushed outside the house, go do your own life now. Then this kind of family value effect on sustainability is not clearly evident. So understanding this can help us craft messages that will get individuals more concerned about environmental or social sustainability aspects.
Thank you, Costas. Very, very good answer. And so finally, then moving on to Alex, there are a couple of questions in the chat. So the first one, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about your plans for engaging primary school children, particularly commenting on how children conceptualize CO2, I suppose.
Yeah, happily. So with the engagement work going into the schools, we're aiming our workshops at sort of that top end of Key Stage 2. As interestingly, actually, it's been found that sort of year group are actually really engaged with environmental issues at the moment. As part of our relationship with Key City Council, we've also actually been connected with other charitable organisations in the city, in particular Rethink Leeds, who actually do loads of work with schools already to sort of focusing on environmental issues, more like focused around food waste and the environmental impacts of food waste. But they've found that kids at the minute are very engaged and really, really interested in learning about this. So first of all, that's quite a good baseline to work off, with having kids actually sort of it being something that we can at least grab their attention with. And the important thing about like you say, communicating about sort of CO2 emissions is just using the right language. And so sort of as part of that, having, just making that, what we're looking is as long as they can make that association kind of between their food and between the footprint, and just, that we all leave sort of some mark to some extent, and we don't want it to be a scary thing that we're sort of overwhelming them with. What we're looking to do is just equip them with sort of an action of it being like, we do all leave this impact, but it is something that we can all also look to reduce. It's something, and, you know, making them feel empowered going away from the session as well. So that's why we've developed sort of an interactive game to build on that association, as it's sort of Trumps-esque, where it will sort of be accounting for, you know, comparing the different meals and comparing different ingredients, so they can start to understand and learn what could make a low carbon food, and they can go away from the session and start to, you know, look at what they're eating and look at the school meals that we've sort of introduced to them with as well. They can start to look at them and really pull out maybe what's low carbon there. So it's just making that association and making it be something that they take home sort of action for them as well from it.
Great, thank you. And then there's a question from Brian as well, who's asking around the rationale for focusing on carbon in particular, in contrast to other kind of environmental impacts and indicators.
Yes, so we chose carbon as sort of a first sort of point to look, the first metric for this, as there is quite good quality data available that's open data about the carbon emissions of different foods. And also, as this is sort of, the project is lending to the net zero strategy, looking at carbon footprint was quite a clear sort of goal there that we could sort of pull into the choices that also policy-wise and procurement-wise the council will be making. However, going forwards, definitely being aware of environmental impacts beyond just carbon is something really, really important. And although there are all of these targets, it's really important to also be mindful of the other impacts that are coming from our food choices as well. So again, that's something that sort of we can see in the future of the tool is something to build in further implications there if possible.
Thank you. And Brian's also asked whether the tool is available for public use.
Not at the minute, I'm afraid. It's we've just sort of released it to the council for them to sort of work with and trial and feedback to us on, I'm afraid. But thank you for your interest.
Thank you. That's all from me. I'm going to hand back over to Caitlin.
Fantastic. So yeah, thank you very much for all your fantastic questions, and yeah, to all the speakers for their brilliant presentations as well. I think we'll leave it there now since we haven't got any other questions, but just to say that you can visit the CDRC website to find out more about the presentations, the project the presentations are based on, and I believe that further information as well about the speakers and their details will be circulated to attendees tomorrow. So thank you very much for joining us, and we will see you hopefully in the next session.